In a quiet suburban neighborhood, the HOA issued a sudden notice: no flags were to be flown, not even by John, a retired veteran who proudly displayed the stars and stripes. John's neighbors admired his patriotism, but the HOA board saw it as a violation. They claimed the flag disrupted the uniform look of the community. John was devastated. For him, the flag wasn't decoration. It was a symbol of sacrifice, of brothers lost overseas, and of his own lifelong service. But the HOA gave him 24 hours. Take the flag down or face daily fines that could ruin him. That night, John sat alone on his porch, staring at the flag. The quiet hum of the neighborhood felt heavier than ever before. Memories flooded back, faces of fallen comrades, the sound of gunfire, the weight of sacrifice. The flag was all he had left of them. The next morning, John's neighbor Sarah stopped by. She had seen the notice and knew what it meant to him. "John, they can't do this to you," she whispered. "This flag belongs here." Word spread quickly. By evening, neighbors began gathering quietly outside John's home. One by one, they brought candles, flags, and words of encouragement. John wasn't alone anymore. The HOA board arrived, furious to see the crowd. Their power was being challenged. But no one moved. The neighborhood had drawn a line. This was bigger than rules, it was about respect. John rose slowly from his chair, walked to the flag, and saluted. His eyes glistened with quiet defiance. For a moment, the entire street was silent. Even the board members froze. And then, one neighbor began to sing softly. Soon, the whole block joined in. Their voices carried into the night. The next morning, Daniel noticed small flags quietly placed in front of several homes. At first, he thought it was coincidence. But then he realized, this was no accident. Word spread fast, neighbors were tired of the HOA's control. One by one, families began joining in silent protest. By afternoon, Daniel's street was lined with red, white, and blue. The HOA's rules were collapsing in silence. The HOA board panicked. Their power was being tested, and the community was no longer afraid. That night, Daniel stood outside his home, watching the flags. For the first time in years, he felt proud, and not alone. The protest grew. By dawn, every street in the community shimmered with flags, an unstoppable wave of silent defiance. The HOA president tried issuing fines. But no one paid. The community stood together, stronger than ever. When threats failed, the HOA sent letters. But each one was torn apart, burned, or thrown back. The board realized something terrifying: no rulebook could silence unity. That weekend, veterans from nearby towns came to show support, lining the streets with even more flags. Daniel felt overwhelmed. What started with one flag had now become a movement. But the HOA wasn't finished. They prepared their most aggressive attack yet. A lawsuit was filed. Daniel's name was on the first page. But Daniel wasn't alone. His neighbors promised, they would fight this together. The war between the HOA and the community had just begun. The next morning, Robert stepped onto his porch and froze. Across the street, another small flag had been planted in a neighbor's yard. It was subtle, but undeniable. Someone was standing with him. By noon, 2 more flags appeared. Then 3. Each one placed carefully, like a quiet rebellion spreading across the neighborhood. Neighbors who had once stayed silent began to nod at Robert as he passed. The unspoken message was clear: you're not alone anymore. The HOA noticed almost immediately. Their board members stormed through the neighborhood, snapping pictures and scribbling notes, their faces twisted with rage. They knocked on doors, demanding compliance, threatening fines. But door after door stayed shut. No one backed down. That evening, Robert stood in his yard, looking at the rows of flags. His chest swelled with pride. The community had found its voice. But the HOA wasn't finished. A letter arrived in Robert's mailbox, final warning. Remove the flags, or face legal action. Robert read it aloud at dinner, his voice steady. His wife placed her hand on his. His daughter whispered, "Dad, don't give up." That night, Robert couldn't sleep. He walked outside under the moonlight, staring at the flags, the wind carrying their silent defiance. He whispered to himself, "This is bigger than me. It's about all of us." His determination hardened into resolve. The next day, Robert wasn't alone. Dozens of neighbors gathered on his lawn, each holding their own flag. One by one, they planted their flags in the ground. A sea of red, white, and blue rose before the HOA's eyes. The HOA arrived, furious, but stopped dead in their tracks. This wasn't one man anymore. This was an entire community standing together. The board tried shouting, threatening, waving papers in the air. But no one moved. No one lowered their flag. And for the first time, the HOA felt powerless. Their authority meant nothing against the strength of unity. The HOA board gathered for an emergency meeting, furious about the sudden appearance of flags across the community. One member slammed his fist on the table, demanding fines and immediate removal of the flags. But the HOA president remained unusually quiet, staring at the flag outside his own window. Rumors spread quickly. The president's father was a war veteran. The hypocrisy could not be ignored. By dawn, the community felt more united than ever. Neighbors stood side by side, saluting the rows of flags. But the HOA doubled down, sending violation letters to every home that displayed a flag. Families gathered in driveways, reading the letters with disbelief and growing anger. "Are they really going to fine all of us?" a mother asked, her voice trembling. The veteran stood tall. "They can fine us all they want. We won't back down." Neighbors clapped, cheering his defiance. The fight was no longer his alone, it belonged to everyone. That night, the community planned their next move in hushed conversations over fences and porches. The HOA underestimated their unity. What came next would change everything. At sunrise, every lawn displayed not one, but 2 flags, an act of rebellion the HOA could not ignore. It was no longer about one man's right. It was about the entire neighborhood's freedom. And for the first time in years, the HOA realized they might have finally met their match. The HOA president, a stern man named Carl, slammed his fist on the table. "We cannot lose control of this community." One board member whispered, "But what if more neighbors join the protest?" Fear lingered in her voice. Outside, the veteran stood tall in front of his home, surrounded by neighbors who came to show support. A little boy tugged at the veteran's sleeve. "Sir, my dad said you fought for us." "Thank you." The veteran's eyes watered. The veteran knelt down, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I did it for families like yours." That evening, the HOA sent out letters threatening fines for every unauthorized flag. Neighbors gathered again, furious at the threats. They refused to take their flags down. The veteran raised his voice, "This isn't about one flag. This is about our freedom." The crowd cheered. The HOA president watched from his window, anger boiling inside him. "If they won't obey, we'll make them." Late that night, a mysterious truck parked near the veteran's home. Men in uniform stepped out quietly. They began removing flags from lawns in the dead of night, hoping no one would notice. But one neighbor had been watching. He snapped photos with his phone as evidence. The next morning, those photos went viral across the community group chat. Outrage exploded. The entire neighborhood demanded the HOA explain their midnight operation. The HOA sent out letters threatening heavy fines to anyone who dared display a flag again. But the silence in the community only fueled the storm that was coming. Neighbors gathered quietly, exchanging looks of defiance. They were tired of being silenced. The air carried a sense of rebellion. At sunrise, one house displayed a small flag again. Then another. And another. By noon, the street was lined with flags fluttering in defiance. The HOA president's jaw dropped as he drove through the community, witnessing a sea of red, white, and blue. Calls were made, warnings issued, but nobody took their flags down. The unity was stronger than fear. A veteran stepped forward, standing tall with his uniform, saluting the flags that lined the community. The neighbors cheered, not just for him, but for their freedom and unity against tyranny. News cameras arrived, capturing the moment the community turned the HOA's power upside down. The story spread beyond their town. Across the state, people started flying flags in solidarity. The HOA's threats became meaningless. They couldn't fine everyone. They couldn't silence unity. What started as one man's flag became a movement of dignity, pride, and freedom. The veteran smiled. He had fought battles overseas, but this was about home. The HOA's power crumbled, replaced by a lesson in unity they would never forget. In the end, the flags didn't just represent freedom, they represented the people's refusal to bow down. The community gathered in silence, each holding their flag high. It wasn't just about one man anymore, it was about all of them standing united against the HOA's cruelty. For the first time, the HOA board realized their grip was slipping. Fear flashed across their faces as they watched a sea of flags wave in defiance. The veteran, once humiliated, now stood taller than ever. His neighbors had transformed his personal battle into a community uprising. The HOA tried one last tactic, a letter threatening legal action against every resident who participated in the display. But instead of fear, the community laughed. For every letter delivered, another flag was raised. Even children joined in, running down the street with tiny flags in their hands, their laughter drowning out the HOA's threats. The veteran's eyes welled with tears. For the first time in years, he felt the dignity he had fought to protect overseas was alive at home too. The HOA's authority collapsed under the weight of unity. What was once a dictatorship became a powerless committee. The veteran's home became a symbol, more than a house, it was the heart of a movement. From that day forward, every morning began the same way, with neighbors stepping out proudly, their flags waving side by side. The HOA had tried to silence one man, but instead they awakened an entire community. The story spread beyond their neighborhood. Soon, other communities began raising their flags in solidarity. The veteran, once just a quiet man in a small house, had become the symbol of resistance against injustice everywhere. The HOA faded into irrelevance, but the spirit of unity lived on, stronger than any rulebook. And so, every flag that waved in that neighborhood carried a promise, that no voice, no matter how small, would ever be silenced again. The HOA president marched into the community square, his voice booming as he declared, "This rebellion ends now." But his words were met with silence, and then, one by one, neighbors raised their flags higher. The silence broke when a young boy stepped forward, holding a flag nearly his own height. His trembling voice said, "This is for my dad, he's serving overseas." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even the toughest neighbors felt their eyes sting with tears. The HOA president faltered, his authority suddenly shaken by a child's courage. An elderly veteran then stepped forward, saluted the boy, and planted his flag in the ground. His voice cracked, "For every soldier, past and present." One by one, more neighbors followed, planting flags, raising banners, lining the street with red, white, and blue. The HOA board was surrounded by symbols of unity they could not erase. The president shouted, "Take them down," but not a single board member moved. Their fear of the people outweighed loyalty to him. A storm rolled overhead, thunder cracking as if the skies themselves sided with the people. The president's words were drowned out by the roar of nature. The neighbors began to chant, their voices uniting as one, "We stand together. We stand together." The sound grew louder, shaking the HOA's fragile power. The president's face twisted with rage. He screamed until his voice broke, but his words were lost beneath the people's defiance. Suddenly, the HOA lawyer whispered in his ear. His face fell pale. The rebellion had reached legal ground the HOA could not touch. The lawyer announced aloud, "They're protected by federal law. We cannot stop them." Gasps erupted, but this time, they were filled with relief. The president dropped his gavel in defeat. It clattered onto the pavement, echoing like the death of his reign. The neighbors erupted in cheers, waving their flags higher than ever. For the first time in years, freedom rang louder than fear. The boy looked up at the veteran beside him. The old man placed a hand on his shoulder and whispered, "You gave us courage tonight." And as dawn finally broke, the neighborhood stood transformed, not by fear, but by unity, dignity, and freedom that no HOA could ever silence. The morning sun revealed a neighborhood covered in flags. Veterans, families, children, everyone had joined in solidarity. The HOA board woke up in disbelief. Their attempt to silence one man had united the entire community. Instead of division, the neighborhood was now bound by respect and pride. The veteran stood tall, tears welling in his eyes as he realized he was not alone. News crews soon arrived, cameras capturing the powerful display of defiance. The story spread like wildfire. Headlines read, "HOA silenced by flags of freedom." Support poured in from across the country, veterans and civilians alike applauding the stand. The HOA board tried to respond, but their authority crumbled under public pressure. Letters and calls demanded the HOA resign immediately. But the veteran had no interest in revenge, only dignity and freedom. Children played in the streets, their laughter echoing through a neighborhood once divided. The entire block now stood as a living reminder of unity against oppression. The HOA's darkest act had ignited the brightest flame of resilience. This neighborhood would never again bow to fear. And so, a single act of defiance became a legacy of courage for generations to come. The HOA doubled down, declaring that all flags must come down by the end of the day, or fines would escalate. But instead of removing them, the community made a plan to raise even more flags. The next morning, not only were the flags still standing, but dozens more had appeared across lawns, porches, and rooftops. The HOA president was furious, storming through the neighborhood with a clipboard, scribbling violations non-stop. But something had changed. The HOA's power was crumbling as unity grew stronger than fear. The media soon caught wind of the story, broadcasting the neighborhood's defiance nationwide. Suddenly, this wasn't just about one veteran, it became a national symbol of dignity and resistance. The HOA board tried to silence the press, but every attempt only made the story grow bigger. Donations poured in for the veteran, as thousands thanked him for standing his ground. The HOA's threats of fines became meaningless, as lawyers volunteered to defend the community for free. Court dates were set, but the neighborhood didn't back down for a second. Each day leading up to the trial, more flags went up, until the entire neighborhood became a sea of red, white, and blue. It was no longer just about defying the HOA, it was about honoring every veteran who had ever fought for freedom. And in that unity, the HOA's grip finally started to break. But just when the community thought victory was theirs, the HOA prepared one last desperate move. The HOA president stormed into the neighborhood meeting, furious. He slammed his fist on the table, declaring that the flags had ruined the image of the community. But the crowd wasn't with him anymore. Whispers of defiance rippled through the room. For the first time, the residents spoke up. One by one, voices rose, challenging the HOA's authority, reminding them that freedom couldn't be taken away. The veteran sat silently, tears in his eyes, as his neighbors defended him. The HOA tried to silence them, threatening fines and penalties. But the more they threatened, the stronger the community's resolve became. What began as whispers turned into a thunderous chant, "Let the flag fly." The veteran couldn't believe it. For years, he had fought alone, against enemies overseas, against silence at home. But today, his community stood shoulder to shoulder with him. The board president finally snapped. Red-faced, he shouted, "This neighborhood will obey." His voice cracked under the weight of the crowd's defiance. But instead of fear, the people laughed. Their unity was unbreakable now. The veteran finally rose from his seat, slowly, with dignity, and walked to the front. He looked the president in the eye and spoke just 4 words, "You will not win." Silence filled the room, heavy and undeniable. The room erupted, not in chaos, but in applause. The neighbors cheered, clapping and shouting, as if victory had already been declared. Outside, the flags continued to wave, dozens of them, standing tall against the morning sky. The HOA had no power left. That night, word spread beyond the community. Videos of the protest went viral, reaching thousands who had faced similar HOA tyranny. Messages of support poured in, letters, emails, and even donations for legal action. What had started with one man's flag had become a national movement. The veteran was humbled. He never wanted fame, only respect. Now, he carried the weight of a symbol far greater than himself. The HOA, now cornered, tried one last desperate move. They called for a vote to expel him from the neighborhood. But when the vote came, the result stunned them. Overwhelmingly, the community sided with the veteran. The board's power had crumbled. The veteran stood at the center, surrounded by cheers. For once, he wasn't just a soldier of the past, he was the hero of the present. The community stood united, each house flying the American flag, a silent declaration of defiance against the HOA's oppressive rules. Whispers spread through the neighborhood, "They can't take us all down." The unity gave strength to even the quietest residents. The HOA board was furious. They stormed the streets, clipboards in hand, issuing violation notices to nearly every home. But instead of fear, the neighbors laughed. They ripped the notices down and replaced them with more flags. For the first time, the HOA's power was crumbling. The residents had chosen loyalty to their values over fear. The veteran, who once stood alone, now saw his sacrifice reflected in every waving flag. His eyes welled with pride. The HOA threatened legal action, but with media attention growing, their threats carried no weight. News stations picked up the story. Headlines read, "Community fights back against HOA tyranny." Support poured in from across the nation. Veterans, families, and strangers all sent their solidarity. The HOA's days were numbered. Their leaders faced lawsuits, and their influence began to collapse. Neighbors cheered as new leadership was elected, leaders who valued freedom and respect over control. The veterans stood at the heart of it all, a living reminder of the cost of freedom, and the strength of unity. Where fear once ruled, now dignity reigned. The community had reclaimed their voice. The battle was over, but the message was eternal: no power is stronger than a united community. This was more than resistance, it was a legacy. One man's flag had become everyone's banner of freedom.